7 brides had fled screaming from Rowan Granger's mountain cabin. The 8th arrived carrying nothing but a battered suitcase and a lifetime of rejection. When the stagecoach driver saw her, broad-shouldered, defiant, everything frontier society called unmarriageable, he gave her 3 days before she'd come running back down that mountain, broken like all the others. He was wrong. What happened instead would transform the most feared man in the wilderness and prove that sometimes the unwanted become the unforgettable. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this journey travels. The valley spread below like a scar across frozen earth. All gray timber and harder men. The kind of place where women learn young to make themselves small and marriages got arranged like livestock trades. Mabel Hartwell stood on that stagecoach platform with January wind cutting through her wool coat, watching her father count the coins he'd just received. Bride price. That's what they called it when families got paid to ship off daughters nobody wanted. She was 24, heavy through the hips and shoulders, thick-armed from years of farm work her brothers refused to do. Her mother had spent 2 decades apologizing for her to neighbors, to churchgoers, to anyone who'd listen. Too big, too loud, too stubborn. Who'd marry that? Apparently a mountain man desperate enough to pay for mail-order brides. 7 times. The stagecoach driver, a weathered man named Pike, who'd seen enough frontier cruelty to grow numb to most of it, checked his pocket watch and shook his head. "You sure about this, miss? Rowan Granger ain't exactly known for his hospitality." "I'm sure he's no worse than the people who raised me." Mabel's voice came out flat. She'd cried all her tears 3 days ago when her mother handed her that newspaper clipping. Mountain man seeking wife, room and board provided, no beauties need apply. That last line had made her laugh until her ribs hurt. No beauties. Finally, something she qualified for. Pike loaded her trunk. 1 battered piece of luggage containing 2 dresses, a sewing kit, her grandmother's Bible, and a cast-iron skillet she'd stolen from her mother's kitchen out of spite. Everything she owned fit in a box small enough for 1 man to carry. "The others," Mabel said quietly. "The 7 before me. What happened to them?" Pike's jaw worked like he was chewing words he didn't want to spit out. "First one lasted 2 days. Said Granger didn't speak a dozen words the whole time, just stared at her like she was a wolf in his chicken coop. Second one made it almost a week before she woke up screaming about the silence. Said the mountain was too quiet, too empty, drove her half mad. And the others? Variations on the same theme. Pike climbed onto the driver's bench. Cold, isolated. That cabin's 3 hours up a trail that'd make a mountain goat nervous. No neighbors, no town nearby. Just Rowan Granger and whatever demons he's got living up there with him. The horses stamped, eager to move. Mabel pulled her coat tighter. He ever hurt any of them? Not that they said, but fear don't always come from fists, if you catch my meaning. Pike gathered the reins. Valley folks say he's cursed. Others claim the mountain itself is wrong somehow, that it chews up soft things and spits them back out broken. All I know is 7 women went up that trail, and 7 women came running back down it looking like they'd seen the devil himself. Then I guess I'll be the 8th. Pike made a sound between a laugh and a sigh. You got grit, I'll give you that. But grit don't keep you warm when the temperature drops 40 below, and the nearest human being is a man who treats conversation like a war crime. The stagecoach lurched forward. Mabel gripped the side rail as the valley fell away behind them, replaced by pine forests so thick the sunlight barely penetrated. The road, if you could call 2 frozen ruts a road, climbed steadily upward into country that looked like it had never known human kindness. She'd grown up in Ohio flatlands where you could see tomorrow's weather coming from miles away. This was different. Mountains rose on all sides like prison walls, their peaks lost in cloud cover that never seemed to lift. The trees grew twisted and mean, their branches clawing at the stagecoach as it passed. "How much further?" Mabel asked after an hour of climbing. 2 more. Trail gets worse from here." Pike navigated around a washout that would have sent them tumbling into a ravine. "You can still turn back, you know. I won't think less of you." But Mabel had nowhere to turn back to. Her father had made that clear when he'd pocketed Rowan Granger's money and told her to pack. "You're 24 years old and eating us out of house and home. This mountain man's your last chance at anything resembling a normal life." Normal. The word tasted like ash. The air grew thinner as they climbed. each breath a little harder to catch. Mabel's ears popped. The temperature dropped until frost formed on the stagecoach rails despite the afternoon sun. When they finally crested a ridge and Pike pulled the horses to a stop, Mabel saw why 7 women had fled. The cabin sat in a clearing that looked carved from the mountain by something angry. Massive logs formed walls thick enough to stop bullets. The roof was layered pine bark and sod, built to survive winters that could bury a man standing upright. Elk antlers hung above the door like a warning. Firewood stood stacked in cords that reached the eaves, enough to burn for months without running out. But what struck Mabel most was the silence. No bird song, no wind chimes, no signs of anything soft or gentle or remotely feminine. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress built by someone who expected the world to attack. And standing in front of that fortress, axe in hand, was Rowan Granger. He was bigger than Mabel had imagined. 6.5 feet of scarred muscle and hard edges, dressed in buckskin and wool that had seen better decades. His face looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountain, all sharp angles and old violence. Dark hair fell past his collar, unwashed and unkempt. His hands, wrapped around that axe handle, were massive things covered in calluses and old scars. But his eyes were what made Mabel's breath catch. Ice blue and utterly empty, like looking into a frozen lake and seeing nothing alive beneath the surface. Pike cleared his throat. "Got your bride, Granger?" Rowan said nothing, didn't move, just stood there studying Mabel the way you'd study a horse you weren't sure was worth the feed. The silence stretched until Mabel couldn't stand it anymore. She climbed down from the stagecoach, her boots hitting frozen ground with a thud that echoed across the clearing. Her legs shook. From the long ride or fear, she couldn't tell. She walked straight toward this mountain of a man who'd sent 7 women screaming back to civilization, and when she got close enough to see the old knife scar running along his jaw, she spoke. "If this marriage starts with me carrying my own bags, we're already in trouble." Pike made a strangled sound behind her. Somewhere in the trees, a raven cawed like it was laughing. Rowan's expression didn't change. For 10 seconds that felt like 10 years, he just stared at her. Then, without a word, he drove his axe into a stump, walked past her to the stagecoach, and lifted her trunk like it weighed nothing. He headed toward the cabin. Mabel looked back at Pike, who sat frozen on his bench wearing an expression of pure shock. "You just—" Pike started. "Nobody talks to him like... He wants a wife. He can act like a husband." Mabel straightened her shoulders. "How much does he owe you for the ride?" "Already paid." Pike was still staring at Rowan's back. "Miss Hartwell, I'll be back through here in 3 days. If you want to leave, I won't." "You don't know that." "Yes," Mabel said quietly, watching Rowan disappear into that fortress of a cabin. "I do." Because she'd spent 24 years in a house where her own family treated her like a burden they couldn't wait to discard. She'd endured her mother's disappointed sighs, her father's irritated glances, her brother's cruel jokes about how she'd die an old maid because no man would want to bed a woman who could probably out-wrestle him. Whatever waited for her in that cabin, it couldn't be worse than the slow death of being unwanted by the people who were supposed to love you. Pike shook his head, gathered his reins, and turned the stagecoach around. 3 days, Miss Hartwell. I'll be listening for you screaming all the way down that mountain." Then he was gone, and Mabel was alone with a man who'd frightened away 7 women before her. She found him inside, setting her trunk beside a rough-hewn bed frame. The cabin's interior matched its exterior, all function, zero comfort. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold despite the dropping temperature. A wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves holding preserved food, ammunition, and tools. Furs everywhere, wolf, bear, elk, covering floors and walls like the mountain had invaded the space. No curtains, no rugs, no photographs or paintings or anything remotely decorative. It looked like a place where someone existed but didn't live. Rowan stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid. "Thank you," Mabel said, "for carrying the trunk." "Nothing. The driver said you don't talk much." Silence. "That's fine. I talk enough for 2 people anyway." She moved to the fireplace, noting the dead coals. "How long has this been out?" "Since morning." His voice came out rough, like he'd forgotten how to use it, deep enough to feel in her chest. "It's freezing in here." "I don't feel cold." "Well, I do." Mabel knelt by the hearth, examining the setup. Her father had taught her one useful thing, how to build a fire that'd last through the night. She found kindling stacked nearby, struck a match from the tin on the mantel, and within minutes had flames crackling back to life. When she stood and turned around, Rowan was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "What?" Mabel brushed ash from her hands. "The others couldn't manage fire." He said it like an observation, not a compliment. The others probably had servants growing up. Mabel looked around the cabin. "Where do you keep the cleaning supplies?" "Don't have any." "Of course you don't." She spotted a bucket near the door. "There a stream nearby?" 50 yards north." "Show me." For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then he grabbed the bucket and headed outside. Mabel followed him down a narrow path through pine trees to where mountain water rushed over stones, so cold it made her teeth ache just looking at it. Rowan filled the bucket without being asked. "The women before me," Mabel said, watching him work. "Did you want them to leave?" His shoulders tensed. "Didn't want them here in the first place." "Then why send for brides?" "Wasn't my idea." He straightened, bucket in hand. "Valley folks got it in their heads I needed civilizing. Pooled money for the first bride. When she left, they sent another, then another. Became a game to them. See if anyone could tame the mountain monster." "That's cruel." "That's frontier humor." Rowan started back toward the cabin. "They stopped finding it funny around bride number 5. Mabel hurried to keep pace. "But you kept accepting the women. Didn't have a choice. They'd show up whether I wanted them or not." He set the bucket down inside the cabin door. "Learned it was easier to let them stay a few days, realize what they'd signed up for, then send them back down the mountain before winter trapped them here." "What about this time?" Rowan finally looked at her directly. "What about it?" "Winter's already here. If I leave now." "Then you better start packing." Something hot and familiar flared in Mabel's chest, the same anger that had burned through her every time her family treated her like a problem to solve instead of a person to value. "I'm not leaving." "You will." Rowan moved to the fireplace, adding logs with efficient, practiced movements. "They all do. Give it 2 days, maybe 3. Then you'll realize how quiet it gets up here, how far from anything civilized, how long winter lasts. You'll start hearing things in the silence, seeing shadows where there's nothing. The mountain does that to people who aren't meant for it." "Or maybe," Mabel said, rolling up her sleeves, "the mountain just shows people who they really are." She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning a cabin that clearly hadn't been properly cleaned in years. She scrubbed the table, organized shelves, swept floors, and washed dishes that had been stacked dirty for who knew how long. The work felt good, familiar. Her mother used to punish her with extra chores, not realizing Mabel preferred physical labor to sitting still and being decorative. Rowan watched her from various positions around the cabin, never offering to help, never telling her to stop. Just observing with those cold eyes like she was an animal doing something unexpected. When the sun started sinking behind the peaks, painting the snow orange and gold, Mabel investigated his food stores. She found dried venison, potatoes going soft, onions, and some questionable-looking flour. "When's the last time you had a hot meal?" she called over her shoulder. "I eat." "That's not what I asked." Mabel pulled out a cast-iron pot. "Sit down. I'm making stew." "Don't need you cooking for me." "I need to eat, and I'm not eating alone, so sit down or starve. Your choice." She heard him move behind her, then the scrape of a chair. A small victory. Mabel cooked the way her grandmother had taught her, with enough salt to matter and enough time to let flavors marry properly. The cabin filled with smells of meat and onions and something almost comfortable. When she finally ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls and set one in front of Rowan, he stared at it like she'd handed him a puzzle. "It's not poisoned," Mabel said, sitting across from him. "Didn't think it was." "Then eat." He did. Slowly at first, then faster. He finished the entire bowl without speaking and set it down with careful precision. "The others didn't cook," he said finally. "You mentioned they couldn't manage fire. I'm guessing basic survival skills weren't high on their priority list." Mabel ate her own stew, grateful for the warmth spreading through her chest. "What did they do all day?" "Cried mostly. Complained about the cold, the isolation, the lack of entertainment." Rowan's jaw tightened. "One of them brought a piano." "A piano?" Had it hauled up here on a mule train. Thing cost more than this cabin. Sat in that corner for 4 days before she realized I didn't have any interest in evening concerts and left. He gestured to a spot near the fireplace. Took me 2 days to haul it back down the mountain. Despite everything, Mabel laughed. The sound startled both of them. Rowan's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something less granite-like. You find that funny? I find it ridiculous. Who brings a piano to a mountain cabin? Someone who had no business being here in the first place. He stood, took both bowls to the bucket of water. None of them did. And me? He paused, his back still to her. Too early to tell. The temperature dropped fast after sunset. Mabel discovered that mountain cold was different from valley cold, sharper somehow, like it had teeth. She pulled on every layer she'd brought, but still felt the chill seeping through the cabin walls. Rowan banked the fire for the night, then pointed to the bed frame. You sleep there. Where will you sleep? Floor. That's ridiculous. It's freezing. I'm used to it. He grabbed furs from a pile in the corner, started arranging them into a makeshift bed near the hearth. Mabel watched him work. This huge man making himself a nest on hard floor, like he didn't deserve basic comfort. Something about it bothered her in a way she couldn't articulate. The bed's big enough for two, she said quietly. Rowan went still. That's not why I sent for a bride. I didn't think it was. Mabel climbed into the bed, which felt like sleeping on a board. But there's no point in both of us freezing to death our first night. I'm not asking you to touch me. I'm asking you to not die of cold on the floor like an idiot. The silence stretched so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, moving like every muscle hurt, Rowan stood and walked to the other side of the bed. He lay down on top of the furs, fully clothed, leaving a gap between them wide enough to drive a stagecoach through. They lay there in the dark, listening to wind howl through the pines. The others, Rowan said into the darkness, his voice even rougher than usual. They were afraid of me. I know. You're not. Mabel thought about that, about this massive, silent man who'd sent 7 women fleeing in terror, about the fortress cabin and the empty eyes and the reputation that preceded him like a storm warning. I've been afraid my whole life, she said finally, of disappointing people, of taking up too much space, of being too much of everything nobody wanted. Being afraid of you feels like more of the same. She pulled the furs tighter. I'm tired of being afraid. Rowan said nothing, but she felt something shift in the air between them. Not comfort, exactly, but maybe the beginning of something less hostile. Outside, the mountain creaked and settled under its blanket of snow. Inside, 2 unwanted people learned to share space without touching, which was its own kind of intimacy. Mabel fell asleep thinking that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place where being unwanted didn't matter so much. Because up here, everyone was unwanted together. The next morning arrived with the kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals. Mabel woke to find Rowan already gone, the furs on his side of the bed neatly folded. Through the window, she saw him splitting wood with mechanical efficiency. Swing, crack, stack, repeat. No wasted motion, no pause. She dressed quickly, every joint protesting the cold, and went outside. Morning, she called. Rowan's axe came down. You should stay inside. Temperature's dropping. I don't plan to spend winter hiding in that cabin. Mabel surveyed the clearing. What needs doing? He turned to look at her, really look, like he was trying to determine if she was serious. Firewood needs splitting and stacking. Elk I shot yesterday needs butchering. Roof's got a weak spot that'll cave under heavy snow. Take your pick. Show me the elk. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. He led her to where a massive bull elk hung from a tree, already gutted but still needing to be broken down into manageable pieces. You know how to butcher? Rowan asked. My brothers refused to learn, so I did. Mabel accepted the knife he offered. Someone had to. They worked in silence, broken only by the sounds of blades cutting meat, wind moving through trees, and Rowan's occasional instructions when she hit a particularly tough joint. Her hands went numb within an hour, but she pushed through, determined not to prove Pike right about soft women and hard mountains. You're doing it wrong, Rowan said, watching her struggle with a shoulder joint. Then show me the right way, instead of just criticizing. He moved beside her, his bulk blocking the wind. Here." His scarred hands covered hers, guiding the knife through the joint with a twist and pull that made the whole thing separate cleanly. Like that. They were close enough that Mabel could smell him. Wood smoke, leather, and something wild she couldn't name. Close enough to see the old scars crossing his knuckles, the frost caught in his dark hair, the way his breath steamed in the morning air. "Got it," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He stepped back, and they continued working. By noon, they'd reduced the elk to steaks, roast, and stew meat. Rowan showed her how to salt it for preservation, pack it in snow, store it where predators couldn't reach. His instructions were curt but clear, and for the first time Mabel felt like he was teaching her instead of tolerating her. "You're better at this than the others," he said, washing blood from his hands in a bucket of snowmelt. "Because I'm not afraid of hard work? Because you're not afraid of me." Rowan dried his hands on his pants. "The others would barely look at me, jumped every time I moved. One of them locked herself in the cabin the entire time she was here. That must have been lonely." "I'm used to lonely." "That doesn't make it right." Mabel cleaned her own hands, the cold water making her bones ache. "You know what I think? Does it matter? I think you scared them on purpose, made yourself into something so big and mean that they'd leave before they got close enough to matter." Rowan's expression went flat. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're hiding up here for a reason. I know you've built this whole fortress to keep people out. And I know that sending for brides you didn't want was either the Valley's cruelty or your own desperate hope that maybe one of them would stay. Hope's for fools." "Then call me a fool." Mabel met his eyes. "Because I'm still here, and I'm not planning to run screaming just because you've got a bad reputation and worse social skills." They stared at each other across a clearing covered in snow and elk blood. Somewhere overhead, a hawk cried out. The wind picked up, carrying the promise of more cold. Rowan turned away first. "Roof needs fixing before the next storm. If you're serious about staying, you'll need to learn." "Then teach me." He did. For the next 3 hours, they worked on that roof. Rowan moving with the confidence of someone who'd repaired it 100 times. Mabel learning fast and refusing to complain when her fingers went numb or her muscles screamed. He pointed out weak spots, showed her how to layer bark and sod, explained which materials worked best in heavy snow. And slowly, grudgingly, he started talking. Not about anything important, just small observations. The way snow looked before a blizzard. How to tell when the chimney needed cleaning. Which trees made the best firewood. The kind of knowledge you only gained from years of surviving alone. Mabel listened and learned and asked questions that made him pause and think before answering. By the time the sun started sinking again, they'd repaired the weak spot and reinforced 2 others. Rowan climbed down from the roof, landing in snow with a heavy thud, and looked up at their work. "It'll hold," he said. "We make a good team." He didn't respond to that, just headed back inside. But Mabel caught something in his expression. Not agreement exactly, but not disagreement either. That night, she made venison steaks with the last of the soft potatoes. They ate in companionable silence, which felt different from the hostile silence of the night before. When Mabel stood to clean dishes, Rowan stood too. "I'll do it," he said. "We can both do it." So they did, working side by side in the small space, their hands occasionally brushing in the wash water. Each touch felt electric, though Mabel couldn't tell if it was attraction or just the novelty of not being alone. "Why didn't you run?" Rowan asked suddenly, scrubbing a pot with more force than necessary. "When you saw this place, saw me, why didn't you get back on that stagecoach?" Mabel dried a bowl, considering her answer carefully. "Because running meant going back to people who couldn't wait to be rid of me. At least here, the rejection is honest." "I haven't rejected you." "You haven't accepted me either." Rowan set down the pot. "I don't know how." The admission hung between them like smoke. Mabel turned to face him fully, this huge man who'd probably never been vulnerable a day in his life, who was clearly struggling with the simple act of not being alone. "Neither do I," she said softly, "so I guess we'll figure it out together." His eyes searched her face for something, lies maybe, or tricks, or the inevitable moment when she'd change her mind. When he didn't find it, his shoulders dropped slightly, like he'd been holding tension for days. "The third bride," he said quietly, "told me I was unlovable." Mabel's chest tightened. She was wrong. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Because my family told me the same thing for 24 years, and I finally realized that being unwanted by cruel people doesn't make you unlovable. It just makes them cruel. Something cracked in Rowan's expression, not breaking exactly, but definitely shifting. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her, not just as another temporary bride, but as a person who understood what it meant to be discarded. "You're different," he said finally. "So are you." They stood there in the firelight, two broken people learning that maybe broken things could fit together in ways whole things never could. Outside, the temperature dropped toward record lows. Inside, something warmed that had nothing to do with the fire. And for the first time since arriving on this mountain, Mabel thought that maybe, just maybe, she'd found exactly where she belonged. The fourth day arrived with snow so heavy it erased the world beyond the cabin windows. Mabel woke to find Rowan already dressed, standing at the door with his rifle slung over one shoulder. "Where are you going?" she asked, still wrapped in furs. "Checking traps. Won't be long." "In this weather?" "Storm's just starting. If I wait, I won't be able to find them for a week." He pulled on a second layer of buckskin. "Stay inside. Keep the fire going." "I could come with you." Rowan turned, and for a moment she saw something almost like concern flicker across his face. "No, trail's dangerous enough without worrying about someone who doesn't know the mountain." Then he was gone, swallowed by white. Mabel stood at the window watching his dark shape disappear into the blizzard. The cabin felt bigger with him gone, emptier, and she understood for the first time why those other women had found the isolation unbearable. Not because of Rowan himself, but because of how small you felt when you were the only human voice for miles. She forced herself into motion. Fire needed tending, floors needed sweeping, there was always work, and work kept the silence from pressing too close. By noon, the storm had intensified into something biblical. Wind screamed through the pines with a sound like tearing metal. Snow piled against the cabin walls faster than seemed possible. Mabel caught herself checking the door every few minutes, listening for Rowan's heavy tread on the porch. He didn't come. An hour passed, then two. The light began to fade even though it couldn't be later than mid-afternoon, the storm creating a premature twilight that made Mabel's chest tight with worry she didn't want to name. She was adding wood to the fire when the door finally crashed open. Rowan staggered inside, covered head to toe in ice and snow, dragging something heavy behind him. He kicked the door shut and stood there breathing hard, frost clinging to his beard and eyebrows. "You're back," Mabel said, hating how relieved she sounded. "Told you I wouldn't be long." He dropped what turned out to be 2 rabbits and a fox onto the floor. "Trail's buried. Had to navigate by feel the last mile." "You could have died out there." "But I didn't." He shrugged out of his frozen outer layers, and Mabel saw his hands shaking. Not from fear, from cold so deep it had gotten past even his mountain-hardened defenses. "Sit down," she ordered, pulling a chair close to the fire. "Now." "I'm fine." "You're half frozen. Sit." For once, he didn't argue. Mabel brought him hot stew from the pot she'd kept simmering, wrapped a fur around his shoulders, and watched him drink with hands that could barely grip the bowl. "This is stupid," she said, the words coming out harder than she intended. "Going out in weather like this for a couple rabbits. It's not stupid. It's necessary." Rowan set down the empty bowl. "Those traps are how we eat when we can't hunt. If I don't check them regularly, something bigger finds them first and we lose both the catch and the trap. We could have managed without them for one day. You don't understand how fast things go wrong up here." His voice carried an edge now. "One missed trap becomes 2, becomes losing a week's worth of food. Before you know it, you're rationing and hoping spring comes early. And what good does food do if you freeze to death getting it? I've survived worse." "That's not the point." Rowan stood abruptly, the fur falling from his shoulders. "Then what is the point? You want me to stop doing what's kept me alive for 10 years just because you're worried I might get cold? I want you to stop acting like dying alone in a blizzard is perfectly acceptable because you've always been alone." Mabel stood too, meeting his glare with her own. "You have someone here now. That changes things." "For how long?" The question came out raw. "Until you realize what the others did? That this mountain kills everything soft and gentle? That winter here feels like dying slowly? That I'm not worth the effort it takes to stay?" The cabin went silent except for wind hammering at the walls. Mabel stepped closer. "I'm not soft or gentle. I'm the daughter farmers worked to death then threw away like spoiled meat. I've survived 24 years of people telling me I was too much and not enough at the same time. You think one winter on this mountain is worse than that? You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. I know you're testing me, waiting for me to break like the others. But I'm not them, Rowan. I don't break. I'm too stubborn and too tired of running away from hard things. They stood close enough that Mabel could see the ice still melting in his hair, close enough to watch emotions war across his face, doubt and hope, and something that looked like pain. They all said they'd stay, he said quietly. Every single one. And I'm not them. Prove it. The challenge hung between them like a blade. Mabel held his gaze, refusing to look away first, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her fear. Fine, she said. I will. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that sounded like wolves howling. 3 days of snow piling so high against the cabin that Rowan had to dig out the door every morning just to check if the world still existed beyond their walls. 3 days of being trapped in close quarters with a man who'd forgotten how to live with another person. And Mabel learned quickly that proximity bred conflict. You're doing it wrong, Rowan said on the second day, watching her stitch a torn shirt. It's holding together, isn't it? Barely. Here. He took the shirt and needle, his fingers working with surprising delicacy. Like this. Otherwise it'll tear again the first time I move. Mabel watched him sew with hands that could snap her wrist without effort, creating stitches tiny and precise. Where'd you learn that? Had to. No one else to do it. He finished the seam and handed the shirt back. Your way would have lasted maybe a week. Then maybe you should have just done it yourself instead of letting me waste time. You need to learn. I need you to stop criticizing everything I do. Rowan's jaw tightened. I'm not criticizing. I'm teaching. There's a difference? Yes. He stood, agitation rolling off him in waves. Teaching means showing you how to survive up here. Criticizing would be telling you you're useless and should leave. You've already done that multiple times. I told you the truth. That's different from cruelty. Mabel set down her sewing. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, they feel pretty similar. The argument spiraled from there. Rowan criticized the way she stacked firewood. Too loose, it wouldn't dry properly. She snapped back that maybe if he explained things instead of just pointing out failures, she'd learn faster. He said he wasn't used to explaining himself. She said that was obvious and not an excuse. By the time they went to bed that night, both were furious and neither was speaking. But the next morning, Mabel woke to find Rowan restacking the firewood the way he'd wanted it. And when she came outside, he actually showed her why his method worked better, how airflow mattered, how moisture collected, how winter wood needed to season differently than summer. Sorry, he muttered when he finished explaining, for being harsh yesterday. It was the first apology she'd ever heard from him. I'm sorry too, Mabel said, for being defensive. You weren't defensive. I was being a bastard. He handed her a piece of firewood. Try it now. They restacked the entire cord together, and this time when Rowan corrected her technique, he did it without the edge of impatience. And this time, Mabel listened without taking it as an attack. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was progress. The pattern repeated itself over those storm-trapped days. They'd clash over something small, how to prepare food, how to maintain tools, how much wood to burn at night. The arguments would flare hot and sharp, both of them too stubborn to back down easily. But then they'd cool, usually after hours of tense silence, and find themselves circling back towards something like understanding. Why do you fight me on everything? Rowan asked on the third night, watching Mabel reorganize his supply shelves for the second time. Because you're wrong about where things should go. I've had them organized this way for years. That doesn't make it right. The salt should be near the cookpot, not across the cabin. The medicine should be easy to reach, not buried behind ammunition. She moved a tin of salve to a lower shelf. Your system makes no sense. It makes sense to me. Well, there's two of us now, so it needs to make sense to both of us. Rowan crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. The others never touched anything, said it was my cabin, my rules. The others were guests. I'm your wife. Mabel turned to face him. Or I'm supposed to be, which means this is my cabin too, even if you don't like it. Something shifted in his expression. I don't dislike it. Could have fooled me. I don't dislike it, he repeated, pushing off from the doorframe. I'm just not used to it. To sharing space. To someone having opinions about how things should be. Get used to it. Because I'm not going to tiptoe around here pretending to be invisible just to make you comfortable. I don't want you invisible. The words came out rough, like they'd been dragged from somewhere deep. The others tried that, made themselves so small and quiet I'd forget they were here. Then they'd leave, and it was like they'd never existed at all. Mabel set down the supplies she'd been holding. Is that what you want? For me to exist loudly enough that when I leave, you'll actually remember I was here? I want you to stop talking about leaving like it's inevitable. Then stop treating me like I'm temporary. They stared at each other across the cabin, the firelight casting shadows that made Rowan look even bigger and more dangerous than usual. But Mabel had stopped being afraid of his size. She'd learned over the past days that his bark was worse than his bite, that underneath all that growling and criticism was a man who genuinely didn't know how to be close to another person without pushing them away. I don't know how to do this, Rowan admitted finally. Do what? This. Have someone stay. Want someone to stay. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. Every instinct I have says to make you leave before winter gets worse, before you're trapped here, before you realize what a mistake you've made. Because you think I'll leave anyway, and it's better to control when it happens? Yes. Mabel crossed the space between them, close enough to have to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. What if I don't leave? Everyone leaves. Not everyone. Not me. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand on his chest. His heart hammered beneath her palm. I know you don't believe me yet, but I'll keep proving it until you do. Rowan looked down at her hand like it was something foreign and dangerous. Why? Because someone needs to. Mabel stepped back, giving him space. Because you deserve to know what it feels like to be chosen instead of tolerated. Because I'm tired of both of us being alone when we could be alone together. The wind outside reached a crescendo, rattling the shutters hard enough to make them both flinch. Rowan moved to check the door, ensuring the bar was secure, then returned to the fire. Storm's getting worse, he said. Will we be okay? Cabins survived worse. We've got food and fuel. He added another log. We'll be fine. Mabel noticed he'd said we instead of you'll, and the small shift felt significant. They settled into their evening routine, Mabel cooking while Rowan maintained tools, both moving around each other in the small space with increasing comfort. The silences between them had changed over the past days, becoming less hostile and more companionable. Tell me about the fifth bride, Mabel said while stirring stew. Rowan looked up from the knife he was sharpening. Why? Because I want to understand what went wrong, so I don't make the same mistakes. You won't. How do you know? He set down the knife. She was afraid of silence, needed constant noise, constant distraction, brought books and magazines and kept reading out loud until I thought I'd lose my mind. Lasted 6 days before she admitted she couldn't stand how quiet her own thoughts got up here. What about the 6th? Lasted 12 hours. Took one look at the cabin and started crying. Said she'd made a terrible mistake and demanded I take her back down the mountain immediately. Rowan picked up the knife again. I did. And the 7th? His hands stilled. She was cruel. Mabel turned from the stew. What do you mean? Spent 3 days telling me everything wrong with me, how I dressed, how I spoke, how I lived, said I was more animal than man, that she'd been sent to civilize a beast and found the task impossible. His voice went flat. On the 4th day, I gave her money for the stagecoach and told her to leave. I'm sorry. Don't be. She wasn't wrong. Yes, she was. Mabel left the stew and sat across from him. You're not an animal. You're a man who's been alone so long you've forgotten how to be anything else. There's a difference. Rowan met her eyes. Is there? Yes. Animals can't change. Men can, if they want to. And you think I want to change. I think you wouldn't have sent for a bride if some part of you didn't hope things could be different. Mabel reached across the table. Even if you don't believe it yet. His hand moved before he could stop it, fingers brushing against hers. The contact lasted barely a second before he pulled back, but Mabel felt it like a brand. They ate in silence that night, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not empty, not hostile. Just two people learning that maybe words weren't always necessary. When they went to bed, Rowan stayed on his side and Mabel stayed on hers. But the gap between them had narrowed, not by much, but enough. The storm finally broke on the fourth morning. Mabel woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, and a silence so complete it felt like the world had been remade. She found Rowan already outside, digging a path from the cabin door through snow that had drifted higher than her waist. "Let me help," she called. "I've got it." "Rowan?" He paused, looked back at her standing in the doorway, and something in his expression softened. "Fine, there's another shovel inside the door." They worked together clearing paths, to the woodpile, to the stream, to the small shed where Rowan kept larger tools. The snow was heavy and wet, each shovelful feeling like lifting rocks. Mabel's back screamed within an hour, but she refused to stop before Rowan did. "You're going to hurt yourself," he said, watching her struggle with a particularly heavy load. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're turning red and shaking. So are you. I'm used to it." "Then I'll get used to it too." Mabel dumped the snow and immediately dug into the next section. Rowan grabbed her shovel. "Stop." "Excuse me?" "I said stop. You're going to throw your back out and then you'll be useless for a week." He took the shovel from her hands despite her protests. "Go inside, warm up. I'll finish this." "I don't need you to protect me from work." "I'm not protecting you. I'm being practical. One of us injured means twice the burden on the other." He started shoveling again. "So go inside before you hurt yourself trying to prove something I already know." "What do you already know?" Rowan paused, leaning on the shovel. "That you're tougher than you look. That you don't quit even when you should. That you're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. And that's saying something considering the seventh bride once argued with me for 2 hours about the proper way to fold blankets." Despite everything, Mabel laughed. 2 hours? She had opinions. His mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Now get inside before your fingers freeze off." Mabel went, but she watched him through the window as he finished clearing the paths. Watched the way he moved with economical efficiency, never wasting energy, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He'd survived alone up here for a decade, and it showed in every action. When he finally came inside, his face was red from cold and exertion, but there was something almost peaceful in his expression. "Better?" Mabel asked, handing him hot tea. "Snow's cleared. Should last us a few days before the next storm." He wrapped his hands around the cup. "We need to hunt tomorrow. Storm will have scattered the elk." "We?" "You wanted to learn mountain life. Hunting's part of it." He drank the tea in 3 long swallows. "Unless you'd rather stay here." "I'd rather come with you." Rowan nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Then we leave at first light. Dress warm." That night, as they prepared for bed, Mabel noticed Rowan hesitate before lying down. The gap between them had been shrinking incrementally each night, but this time he left almost no space at all. "Cold tonight," he said gruffly. "It is. Body heat's practical. Very practical." They lay there in the dark, not touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. Mabel could hear his breathing, slow and steady, and found her own rhythm matching his. "Mabel?" His voice came quiet through the darkness. "Yes?" "You were right about me testing you." A long pause. "I'm sorry." "I know." "And you're still here." "I told you I would be." Another pause, longer this time, then, "Thank you." Mabel's throat tightened. "For what?" "For staying, for fighting back, for not letting me drive you away." His hand moved in the darkness, finding hers between them. "For being stubborn." Their fingers laced together, rough palm against rough palm, and something fundamental shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. "Get some sleep," Mabel whispered. "We've got hunting tomorrow." "We do." But neither of them let go. The hunt started before dawn. Rowan woke Mabel when the cabin was still dark, and they dressed in silence, adding layers against cold that felt like breathing glass. He handed her a rifle and watched carefully as she checked it, making sure she remembered everything he'd taught her about firearm safety. "Stay close," he said as they stepped into the pre-dawn darkness. "Don't make unnecessary noise. And if I signal you to stop, you stop immediately. Understood? Yes. They moved through snow that crunched beneath their boots, despite their careful steps, following a trail only Rowan could see. The forest looked different in the weak dawn light, all blue shadows and white silence, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Rowan raised his fist, and Mabel froze. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, a small herd of elk grazed in a clearing. 3 cows and a young bull, their breath steaming in the cold air. Rowan gestured for Mabel to circle left while he moved right, positioning them for a clean shot. Mabel's heart hammered so hard she was sure the elk would hear it. She'd hunted before, back in Ohio, but never for something this necessary. Never in country, this unforgiving. Rowan's rifle cracked. The bull dropped. The cows bolted, and Mabel stood frozen, her own rifle unfired, watching the animal's last moments. "Why didn't you shoot?" Rowan asked when he reached her. "I don't know, She looked down at the rifle. "Couldn't." "First time's always hard." He moved toward the fallen elk. "Gets easier." "What if I don't want it to get easier?" Rowan turned back, studying her face. "Then you'll starve." "This isn't Ohio, Mabel. Can't buy meat from a butcher up here. You either kill or you die." "I know that." "Do you?" He walked back to her. "Because knowing it and accepting it are different things. The mountain doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care if killing bothers you. It just keeps being cold and hungry and waiting for you to make a mistake. Stop it." "Stop what? Telling you the truth?" His voice hardened. "This is what I've been trying to tell you. This is why the others left, not because of me, because of this. The constant fight to survive, the knowledge that one mistake means death, the weight of it all pressing down until you can't breathe." Mabel's hands shook around the rifle. "You think I don't know about weight? About things pressing down until you can't breathe?" "That's different." "How? How is it different?" She turned to face him fully. "You think your loneliness is worse than mine? Your fear more real? I've spent my whole life fighting to survive people who wanted me gone. At least the mountain's honest about trying to kill me." They stood in the snow, breath steaming between them, both too angry and too raw to look away. "I'm not trying to scare you off," Rowan said finally. "Yes, you are. You're trying to prove I can't handle this, that I'll break like the others. Because you will." "No, I won't." Mabel stepped closer. "And you know what terrifies you? It's not that I'll leave. It's that I might actually stay, that you might get used to having me here, might start depending on me, might actually care whether I live or die. And then what happens to your fortress, your walls, your perfect isolation?" Rowan's jaw worked. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Mabel's voice dropped. "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you haven't been pushing me harder these past days because you're scared of wanting me to stay." The silence stretched between them, broken only by wind moving through the pines. "We should process the elk," Rowan said finally, not answering, "before scavengers find it." He turned and walked away, and Mabel understood that was as close to an admission as she'd get. They worked together in tense silence, field dressing the elk and preparing it for transport back to the cabin. It was brutal work, bloody and cold, and Mabel forced herself to participate despite her churning stomach. This was survival. This was mountain life. If she wanted to stay, she had to accept all of it. When they finally hauled the meat back to the cabin, both were exhausted and still not speaking. Rowan disappeared to hang the carcass while Mabel went inside to start a fire. She was adding kindling when she heard the crash. Mabel ran outside to find Rowan on the ground, the elk having fallen from its rope. His leg was twisted beneath him at an angle that made her stomach drop. "Don't move," she ordered, kneeling beside him. "It's fine." But his face had gone white with pain. "It's not fine. Stay still." Mabel carefully examined his leg, remembering everything her grandmother had taught her about farm injuries. "I don't think it's broken, but you've twisted it badly. Need to hang the elk." "The elk can wait." "Can you stand?" With Mabel's help, Rowan managed to get upright, but the moment he put weight on his injured leg, he nearly fell again. "Cabin," Mabel said firmly. "Now." She half dragged, half carried him inside, which should have been impossible given their size difference. But adrenaline lent her strength she didn't know she had. She got him to the bed, elevated his leg, and went back outside to finish hanging the elk herself. It took her 3 tries and a lot of creative cursing, but she managed it. When she came back inside, Rowan was trying to stand. "What are you doing?" Need to check the... Sit down. Mabel pushed him back onto the bed with more force than necessary. I'll check whatever needs checking. You're staying off that leg. It's just a twist. It's a bad twist. If you keep walking on it, you'll make it worse. She pulled off his boot carefully, and he hissed in pain. Already the ankle was swelling. This needs to be wrapped and iced. No ice until spring. Then snow. Same difference. Mabel packed his ankle in snow wrapped in cloth, ignoring his protests. You're going to stay in this bed for at least 2 days, maybe 3. Can't. Too much work. Then I'll do it. She met his glare with her own. You've spent the past week teaching me. Time to see if I learned anything. Mabel, no, you don't get a say in this. You're injured, and I'm not. So you're going to rest, and I'm going to keep us alive. End of discussion. For a moment, she thought he'd argue further. Then he leaned back against the furs with a grimace. Fine. But if you need help, I'll ask. I promise. Mabel adjusted the snowpack. Now stop talking and let that ankle rest. For the next 2 days, Mabel ran the cabin alone. She maintained the fires, checked the meat stores, melted snow for water, cooked meals, and even attempted to repair a broken tool latch using techniques she'd watched Rowan employ. Some things she managed well. Others were disasters. But she kept going, refusing to wake Rowan except when absolutely necessary. And slowly, reluctantly, he let her. On the 3rd day, his ankle had improved enough to hobble around. Mabel caught him trying to split firewood and immediately confiscated his axe. You're supposed to be resting. I've rested. I'm fine now. Your ankle's still twice its normal size. It'll be fine once I work the stiffness out. Or you'll re-injure it and be useless for weeks instead of days. Mabel set the axe aside. Sit down. I'll split the wood. You don't have the strength. Watch me. She proceeded to split wood with far less efficiency than Rowan, but with enough determination to get the job done. When she finished, she turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked, breathing hard. You're still here. Where else would I be? Most people would have left. When I got injured, became a burden instead of a provider. Rowan stood carefully, favoring his good leg. Would have been the perfect excuse. I'm not most people. I thought we'd established that. We have. He limped toward her. But knowing it and seeing it are different things. They stood in the cold wood chips scattered around their feet, both exhausted and still not quite trusting this fragile thing building between them. I meant what I said, Mabel told him. I'm not leaving. I'm starting to believe you. Good. Something passed between them then. Not quite acceptance, but not rejection either. An understanding that they were building something neither quite knew how to name. Inside the cabin that night, Rowan's injured ankle propped up, Mabel cooking stew from the elk they'd hunted together. The silence felt less like emptiness and more like peace. And when they went to bed, there was no gap between them at all. Rowan's ankle healed slowly over the following week, and in that time something fundamental shifted between them. The walls he'd built so carefully around himself began showing cracks, small at first, then widening with each day Mabel refused to leave. She caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. Not with suspicion anymore, but with something that looked almost like wonder, like he couldn't quite believe she was real and still there. What? She'd ask, catching him staring while she mended clothes by the fire. Nothing. But his eyes would linger a moment longer before he turned away. They fell into rhythms that felt dangerously close to domestic. Mabel would wake first, restart the fire from banked coals, put coffee on to boil. Rowan would emerge from sleep gradually, his injured ankle making him slower than usual, and they'd share that first cup in comfortable silence while the cabin warmed. Then work. Always work. The mountain demanded it. But even the work felt different now. Less like two people occupying the same space and more like a team operating in sync. When Mabel hauled water, Rowan had the kettle ready. When he chopped kindling one-handed to spare his ankle, she stacked it without being asked. They moved around each other like dancers who'd finally learned the steps. Your ankle's getting better, Mabel observed one morning, watching him walk to the window with barely a limp. Should be full strength in another few days. He looked out at the gray sky. Weather's changing. More snow? Worse, Can smell it in the air. He turned back to her. We need to prepare. Stock up while we can still move freely. They spent the next 2 days in a frenzy of preparation. Rowan showed Mabel how to identify weather signs she'd never noticed before. The way birds flew lower before a big storm, how the wind shifted direction, the particular quality of light that meant trouble coming. They reinforced the woodpile, checked and rechecked their food stores, sealed gaps in the cabin walls with moss and mud. This feels excessive, Mabel said on the second day, helping Rowan drag an entire dead tree to the cabin for emergency fuel. You haven't seen a real mountain winter yet. He secured the tree with rope. What we had before was just a preview. When the deep cold comes, it stays for months. Temperature drops so low that exposed skin freezes in minutes. Snow gets so deep you can't open the door. Wind strong enough to rip the roof off if it's not properly secured. You're exaggerating. I'm not. He met her eyes, and she saw he was completely serious. 2 winters ago, I got trapped in here for 6 weeks straight. Couldn't even get to the woodpile. Had to burn furniture to stay alive. Mabel looked around the sparse cabin, trying to imagine which pieces he'd sacrificed. Which furniture? Doesn't matter. I survived. He started back toward the cabin. And you will too, but only if we prepare properly. That night, as they ate dinner, Mabel asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why stay here? If winters are that brutal, why not move to the valley? Build a cabin somewhere less isolated? Rowan's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. You want to leave? I didn't say that. I'm asking why you chose this place. He was quiet for a long time, staring into his bowl like it held answers. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. I came up here 10 years ago, after the war. Mabel waited, not pushing, letting him take his time. I did things during the fighting, things that made sense when everyone around you was dying, but afterward, he stopped, jaw working. Afterward, I couldn't stand being around people. Couldn't stand the noise, the questions, the way they'd look at me like I was a hero when I knew what I really was. What were you? A killer. He said it flat, like a fact. A good one. That's what made it worse. I was good at it, Mabel, and part of me liked it. The simplicity of it. Enemy or ally. Live or die. No gray areas. Mabel's hands had gone still on her own spoon. So you came here. So I came here, where the only thing trying to kill me was the mountain, and at least that was honest. He looked up at her, his eyes carrying a weight that made her chest ache. The valley folks left me alone at first. Then someone got it in their head I needed saving, and the brides started coming, each one a reminder that I didn't fit anywhere anymore. Until now. Until now. His gaze held hers. You're different. You don't try to save me. Don't try to make me into something I'm not. Because you don't need saving. You need someone who understands that sometimes the broken pieces don't fit back together the same way. And that's okay. Something cracked in his expression, and before Mabel could process what was happening, Rowan stood and crossed to her side of the table. He pulled her to her feet and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and rough and tasted like 10 years of loneliness finally finding its end. Mabel's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and for a moment the entire world narrowed to just this. His mouth on hers, his hands in her hair, the way he held her like she might disappear if he let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan pressed his forehead against hers. I'm not good at this, he whispered. Neither am I. I'll probably mess it up. So will I. Mabel pulled back enough to see his face. But we'll mess it up together. He kissed her again, softer this time, and Mabel felt something in her chest that had been frozen for years finally begin to thaw. That night they didn't sleep on opposite sides of the bed. They didn't sleep much at all. The promised storm arrived 3 days later with a vengeance that made the previous snowfall look gentle. Wind hit the cabin like a physical force, making the walls groan and the roof beams creak. Snow fell so thick that within an hour, the world beyond the windows had vanished completely. Mabel stood at the window watching white nothing while Rowan checked their supplies one more time. We're secure, he said, coming to stand behind her. Enough food for 2 months if we're careful, firewood for 3. And if the storm lasts longer? It won't. His hand settled on her shoulders. But if it did, we'd manage. They settled in to wait out the weather. The first day passed in relative comfort, reading, talking, playing card games with a worn deck Rowan produced from somewhere. The second day brought worse wind and temperatures that made even the fire seem inadequate. The third day, the temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. "This is what you meant," Mabel said, watching frost crawl across the glass. "About real winter." "This is just the start." Rowan added more wood to the fire. "Gets colder." "How much colder?" "Cold enough that your breath freezes before it hits the ground. Cold enough that you can't feel your fingers after 30 seconds outside." He pulled her away from the window. "Cold enough to kill you if you're not careful." They huddled close to the fire that night, both wearing every layer they owned. Despite the furs and the flames, Mabel couldn't stop shivering. "Come here," Rowan said, pulling her against his chest. His body heat helped, and gradually her shaking subsided. "Better?" "Better." She pressed closer. "How do you stand it, year after year of this?" "You get used to it. Learn to find warmth where you can." His arms tightened around her. "Before, I only had the fire. Now I've got you." Something in his tone made Mabel's throat tight. She tilted her head back to look at him. "Are you saying I keep you warm?" "I'm saying you're the only reason I'm not half frozen right now." But there was something in his eyes that suggested he meant more than just physical warmth. The storm raged for 5 days. 5 days of being trapped in close quarters with nothing to do but talk and sleep and try to stay warm. 5 days of Mabel learning things about Rowan she suspected no one else knew. That he could carve intricate figures from wood, that he'd taught himself to read from a single tattered book, that he sometimes had nightmares about the war and woke up swinging. "I'm sorry," he'd said the first time it happened, breathing hard in the darkness while Mabel held him. "I didn't mean to, I know." She'd stroked his hair until his breathing calmed. "It's okay. It's not okay. I could have hurt you. But you didn't, and you won't." She'd pulled his head down to her shoulder. "Whatever you're fighting in your sleep, you're not fighting alone anymore." He'd held her so tight after that she could barely breathe, and Mabel understood she'd given him something he desperately needed. Not absolution, but acceptance. On the 6th day, the storm finally broke. Mabel woke to silence so complete it felt oppressive. She extracted herself from Rowan's arms and moved to the window, rubbing frost away to peer outside. The world had been transformed. Snow had drifted higher than the cabin windows on one side, creating massive sculptures of white that caught the weak sunlight and threw it back in shattered rainbows. The trees looked like they'd been carved from ice, every branch encased in crystal. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Rowan appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It's deadly. All that beauty will kill you if you're not careful." "Can we go out?" "Not yet. Too cold. Give it a few hours for the sun to warm things up." He kissed the top of her head. "We'll need to dig out. Check on the livestock shed. Make sure nothing's damaged." "Livestock? You have livestock?" "2 goats. Keep them for milk and cheese when I can get them to produce." He turned her to face him. "Didn't mention them before because I figured you'd be gone before they mattered." "And now?" "Now they matter." His thumb traced her jaw. "Everything's different now." They spent the afternoon digging out from the storm's aftermath. The work was brutal. Snow packed so hard and heavy that each shovelful felt like lifting stone. Mabel's shoulders screamed within the first hour, but she refused to quit before Rowan did. They found the goats alive but irritated in their small shed, bleating complaints about the weather. Mabel had never dealt with goats before, but she learned quickly under Rowan's instruction how to milk them, how to check their hooves for ice damage, how to give them enough food without wasting precious supplies. "This one's mean," Rowan warned, indicating the larger goat. "Bites if you're not careful." The goat immediately tried to bite Mabel, who smacked its nose without thinking. The animal backed up, looking offended, and Rowan actually laughed. "First person besides me she hasn't managed to get." He scratched the goat's ears. "She might actually respect you. Or she's planning revenge." With goats, it's usually both. They worked until the sun started sinking, then returned to the cabin exhausted and frozen. Mabel's fingers had gone numb despite her gloves, and it took 20 minutes by the fire before she could feel them again. "You did good today," Rowan said, watching her flex her hands. "Better than good. Most people would have quit after the first hour. Most people didn't grow up working a farm where quitting meant getting beaten by their father." The words came out bitter, surprising both of them. Rowan went still. He hit you? When I didn't work fast enough. When I talked back? When he was drunk and I was convenient? Mabel stared at the fire. My mother would tell me it was my fault, that I was too stubborn, too difficult, that if I just tried harder to be the daughter they wanted, things would be better. They were wrong. I know that now. Didn't know it then. She looked at him. You asked me once why I didn't run when I saw this place. Saw you. The truth is, I've spent my whole life running from people who were supposed to love me. When I got here and found someone who was at least honest about not wanting me, it felt like relief. I want you now. The statement hung between them, simple and devastating. I know, Mabel said quietly. That's the terrifying part. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Then Rowan spoke again, his voice carrying a rough edge. The war ended 12 years ago. I was 23 when I came home. Spent 2 years trying to fit back into normal life, failing at every turn, drinking too much, fighting too much, scaring everyone who tried to help. He stared at his scarred hands. My own family stopped talking to me, said I'd turned into something they didn't recognize. So you left. So I left. Came up here thinking I'd stay one winter, clear my head, figure out what came next. His mouth twisted. 10 years later, and I'm still here. Still haven't figured it out. Maybe there's nothing to figure out. Maybe this is just who you are now. A mountain hermit who drove away 7 women? A survivor who finally found someone stubborn enough to stay. Mabel moved closer. You're not who you were at 23, Rowan. War changes people. But that doesn't mean you're broken beyond repair. You sound very sure about that. I am, because I was the daughter who wasn't pretty enough, quiet enough, small enough. And I spent years believing them when they said I was the problem. She took his hand. Now I know different. The problem wasn't me. It was their expectations. Rowan pulled her into his lap, holding her like she was something precious and breakable, despite knowing she was neither. What if I fail you? What if I fail you first? She wrapped her arms around his neck. We're both damaged, Rowan, both carrying scars that won't ever fully heal. But maybe that's okay. Maybe broken people can build something stronger than whole ones ever could. He kissed her then, and it felt like a promise neither of them was quite ready to speak out loud. The next morning brought a sound that made both of them freeze. Voices. Multiple voices, carrying across the snow from somewhere down the mountain. Rowan was at the window immediately, his entire body gone tense. Stay inside. What is it? Trouble. He grabbed his rifle from above the door, the kind that doesn't knock before entering. Mabel joined him at the window and saw them, 4 men trudging up the trail toward the cabin. Even from a distance, she could tell they weren't friendly. They moved with the casual arrogance of men who'd never been told no, carrying rifles slung over their shoulders like accessories. Who are they? Drifters. Trappers, maybe, or worse. Rowan's jaw was set hard. See the one in front? That's Dalton Reed. Runs with a rough crowd out of the mining camps. They work the mountains during winter, taking whatever they want from whoever's too weak to stop them. Have they come here before? Twice. Both times I sent them packing. His hands tightened on the rifle. But I was alone then. Now, he turned to look at her, and Mabel saw real fear in his eyes for the first time. Now they might see you as something worth coming back for. The words hit her like ice water. She'd been so focused on surviving the mountain itself that she'd forgotten about the human dangers lurking in these hills. The men reached the clearing and stopped, surveying the cabin like wolves sizing up prey. The leader, Dalton, was a bear of a man with a thick beard and eyes that looked dead even from a distance. The others spread out slightly, flanking him in a formation that spoke of practice. Rowan stepped outside before they could get closer, his rifle held ready but not yet aimed. Mabel watched from the window, her heart hammering. "You're trespassing," Rowan called out. His voice carried the flat threat of someone who'd backed up words with action before. Dalton smiled, showing teeth gone brown with tobacco. "Now, that's not very neighborly, Granger. Here we are, half frozen and tired, just hoping for a warm meal and maybe a place to rest our heads, and you're already running us off? You're not welcome here. Never have been." That's harsh. Dalton's eyes slid past Rowan to the cabin, and Mabel felt his gaze like something physical crawling across her skin. "Heard you got yourself a wife this time. Eighth one, ain't it? Or did I lose count? Leave. Now.
We will. Just wanted to make sure you knew we were in the area. These mountains can be dangerous this time of year. Lots of accidents happen. Cabins burn down. People go missing. He was still staring at the cabin, and Mabel knew he could see her shape in the window. Be a shame if something happened to you and that pretty wife of yours was left all alone up here. The threat was barely veiled, and Rowan's rifle came up to his shoulder in one smooth motion. I said leave.
Dalton raised his hands in mock surrender, but he was still smiling. Easy, Granger. We're going. But you might want to remember, mountains are lonely places. And accidents, well, they're just part of life up here. The men retreated, but slowly, making a show of their lack of fear. They disappeared back down the trail, but Mabel could still hear their voices carrying through the trees long after they'd vanished from sight. Rowan came back inside, his face carved from stone. They'll come back, Mabel said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He set the rifle down and started checking ammunition stores. Probably after the next storm, when they think we'll be weakened by cold and low on supplies. How many times have they done this? To me? Twice? To others? He didn't finish the sentence, but Mabel understood. What happened to the others? Some fought them off. Others lost everything. Food, furs, sometimes worse. His hand stilled on the ammunition box. There was a trapper 3 years ago, lived alone about 5 miles west. Dalton's crew found him during the deep winter. He stopped, jaw working. They took everything, left him to freeze. By the time I found him, it was too late. Mabel's blood ran cold. Why haven't you killed them? Thought about it. But kill one, and more come looking for revenge. Kill them all, and the law comes asking questions. Either way, I'd lose the life I've built here. He turned to face her. I should have told you about them before, about the dangers that aren't just weather and wildlife. Would it have changed anything? Would it have? Mabel thought about the question seriously. About the life she'd left behind, about the mountain, about this man who'd finally let her see past his walls, about the fact that real danger wasn't just coming, it was already here, circling like wolves around wounded prey. No, she said finally, I'm still not leaving. Mabel, I'm not leaving you to face them alone, and I'm not running away because some bastards with guns think they can scare me. She moved to stand in front of him. You taught me to hunt, to butcher, to survive. Now teach me to fight. Rowan stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. She grabbed his rifle from where he'd set it. Show me how to use this properly. Show me where to aim, how to reload under pressure, how to not freeze when someone's shooting back. You could die. I could die anyway. At least this way I'd die fighting instead of hiding. She held his gaze. You said it yourself. The mountain shows people who they really are. Well, I'm not someone who runs. Not anymore. Something shifted in Rowan's expression, surprise bleeding into respect, then into something fiercer. All right, but we do this properly. No half measures. For the next week, Rowan turned their cabin into a fortress, and Mabel into something closer to a soldier. He showed her how to shoot from cover, how to reload without looking, how to judge distance and wind. He taught her where to hit a man to stop him without killing, and where to hit when killing was the only option. You aim for center mass, he said, guiding her sight picture. Biggest target, easiest to hit when your hands are shaking and everything's chaos. What if I can't do it? When the moment comes, you will, because the alternative is worse. He stepped back. Again, faster this time. They drilled until Mabel's shoulders ached and her hands knew the motions by muscle memory. They practiced barricading the cabin, creating firing positions, coordinating their movements so they wouldn't be caught in crossfire. At night, after the training, they'd collapse by the fire and Rowan would hold her while they both tried not to think about what was coming. I'm scared, Mabel admitted one night, her face pressed against his chest. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. You're not scared? I'm terrified. His arms tightened around her. Not of them. Of losing you. You won't lose me. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She pulled back to look at him. Because I'm too stubborn to die, and you're too mean to let me go without a fight.
He almost smiled at that. Almost. Promise me something. What? If it goes bad, if they get past me, you run. Don't try to be a hero. Just run as fast and far as you can. No. Mabel. I said no. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. I told you I wasn't leaving you. That includes when things get hard, especially when things get hard. So whatever's coming, we face it together. Rowan searched her face for a long moment, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like desperation and devotion in equal measure. Together, he whispered against her lips. God help us both. The attack came during the next storm, exactly as Rowan had predicted. It started with the dogs. Rowan kept 2 half-wild hunting dogs in a pen behind the cabin. Animals Mabel hadn't known about until he'd started preparing for the attack. They never barked without reason, he'd told her. When they started raising hell around midnight, both of them were already awake, dressed, and armed. How many? Mabel whispered, moving to her position by the window. Rowan peered through a gap in the shutters. Can't tell. Storm's too thick. But the dogs only sound like that when there's multiple threats. The wind screamed, making it impossible to hear anything beyond the cabin walls except for the frantic barking that suddenly cut off mid-sound. They killed them, Mabel said, her stomach dropping. They're clearing obstacles. Won't be long now. Rowan checked his rifle one more time. Remember what I taught you. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target. Don't waste ammunition. And if I go down, you won't. If I go down, he repeated, his voice iron, you barricade yourself in the back room and shoot anything that comes through that door. Understood? Before Mabel could answer, something heavy slammed against the cabin door. The bar held, but barely. Another impact followed, then another. They were using a log as a battering ram. They're not even pretending to be subtle, Rowan muttered. He moved to a firing position. When that door breaks, they'll rush through. I'll take the first 2. You watch the windows. Mabel's hands shook around her rifle. All the training in the world couldn't prepare you for the reality of men trying to break into your home to kill you. She forced herself to breathe, to focus, to remember that fear was fine as long as it didn't freeze you. The door exploded inward on the 4th hit, the bar splintering like kindling. 2 men rushed through into the darkness, and Rowan's rifle cracked twice in rapid succession. Both men went down screaming, one clutching his leg, the other his shoulder. Then gunfire erupted from outside, wild, undisciplined, meant to provide cover. Bullets punched through the shutters, sending splinters flying. Mabel ducked below the window line as wood exploded above her head. "East window!" Rowan shouted. Mabel swung her rifle toward the sound of breaking wood and saw a shape climbing through. She fired without thinking, and the shape fell backward with a cry. She'd hit him somewhere, shoulder maybe, or arm, but he was still moving, still dangerous. More gunfire, more splintering wood, the cabin filled with gun smoke and the smell of blood and snow pouring through the broken door. 2 more inside! Rowan's voice cut through the chaos. Mabel spun to see shadows moving through the smoke. One of them raised a rifle toward Rowan's back. She fired, missed, fired again. This time the man staggered, dropping his weapon, but his partner had already reached Rowan. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the larger man trying to get his hands around Rowan's throat. Mabel couldn't shoot without risking hitting Rowan. She grabbed the fire poker instead and swung it like a club, catching the attacker across the side of his head. He released Rowan and turned on her, blood streaming from a gash above his ear. "You bitch!" Rowan's knife took him in the kidney before he could finish. The man collapsed and Rowan kicked him away, already moving to reload his rifle. "How many left?" Mabel gasped, her hands slick with sweat despite the cold. "At least 2 outside, maybe more." He chambered around. "Stay low. They'll regroup and try again." The cabin had become a war zone. 2 men lay groaning near the door, blood pooling beneath them in the firelight. The one Mabel had hit through the window was crawling away into the snow, leaving a dark trail behind him. Bullet holes peppered the walls, letting in streams of frigid air. For a moment, there was silence except for the wind and the labored breathing of injured men. Then Dalton's voice carried through the broken door, thick with rage, and something that might have been grudging respect. "That's good shooting, Granger. Better than I expected. But you're down to, what, maybe 10 rounds, 12? We've got cases of ammunition and all the time in the world." Rowan said nothing, just kept his rifle trained on the doorway. "Here's what's going to happen," Dalton continued. You're going to send that wife of yours out here. She comes peaceful, will leave you with enough supplies to make it through winter, might even leave you breathing. But if you make us come in there again, we'll burn this whole cabin down with both of you inside. Mabel felt Rowan's eyes on her in the darkness. Don't even think about it, she whispered. They'll kill us both if we don't. They'll kill us both anyway. At least this way we die fighting. She reloaded her rifle with shaking hands. I told you I wasn't leaving you. Something fierce and painful crossed Rowan's face. He reached out and pulled her close enough to press his forehead against hers for one brief moment. If we survive this, he said quietly, I'm never letting you out of my sight again. Deal. Time's up, Granger, Dalton shouted. What's it going to be? Rowan's answer was to shoot out the lantern one of the attackers was holding, plunging the clearing into darkness. Curses erupted outside, and more gunfire followed, but it was wild, undirected, hitting nothing but cabin walls. Light the oil, Rowan ordered. Mabel grabbed the bottle they'd prepared, lamp oil mixed with pitch, a rag stuffed in the top. She lit it from the fire and hurled it through the broken door in a high arc. It shattered somewhere in the snow, and flames erupted, casting dancing shadows across the clearing. In the sudden light, Mabel saw them clearly for the first time. 4 men, maybe 5, using the trees for cover. Dalton stood behind a massive pine, his face twisted with rage as he watched his ambush fall apart. Burn them out, he screamed. Burn the whole damn thing. One of his men moved forward with a torch, but Rowan's bullet caught him center mass before he got within 20 feet of the cabin. The torch fell into snow and died, and the man fell beside it, not moving. The return fire was immediate and savage. Bullets ripped through what remained of the door, through the windows, through gaps in the walls. Mabel pressed herself flat against the floor as the world exploded into splinters and gun smoke. When it finally stopped, her ears were ringing so badly she could barely hear Rowan calling her name. I'm okay, she managed, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. I'm okay. We need to move. They're flanking us. Rowan was already shifting position, and Mabel saw what he meant. Shapes moving through the trees on both sides, trying to get around behind the cabin. Back room, he said. Now. They retreated to the cabin's only other room, barely more than a storage closet with a single small window. Rowan barricaded the door while Mabel covered the window. How much ammunition do you have left? She asked. 8 rounds. I have 6. Then we make them count. He positioned himself so he could see both the barricaded door and help cover the window. They'll try to burn us out now. It's what I do. He was right. Within minutes, Mabel smelled smoke. Not the clean smell of the fireplace, but something acrid and wrong. They were lighting the cabin on fire. Rowan. I know. His voice was steady, but his jaw was set hard enough to crack teeth. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the smoke gets too thick to breathe. 5 before the whole structure starts coming down. So what do? We go out fighting. He checked his rifle one last time. When I open this door, you stay behind me. We head for the back window, the one facing the goat shed. It's small, but you'll fit. I'll cover you while you run for the tree line. What about you? I'll be right behind you. Rowan, I'll be right behind you, he repeated, and they both knew he was lying. Mabel grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. We go together or not at all? Mabel, please. Together, that was the deal. She picked up her rifle. So what's the real plan? For a moment she thought he'd keep arguing. Then his shoulders dropped slightly, and he pulled her into a fierce kiss that tasted like goodbye and desperation and love neither of them had been brave enough to name until now. The real plan is we hit them hard and fast. Use the smoke for cover. I'll go left, you go right. We take down as many as we can before they know what's happening. He reloaded his rifle. Then we run like hell and hope we're faster than they are. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one? No. Mabel coughed as smoke started seeping under the door. Let's do it. Rowan kicked open the barricaded door, and they burst through into the main room. The cabin was filling with smoke, flames already climbing the far wall. Through the haze, Mabel could see shapes moving outside, dark against the fire's glow. She went right like Rowan had said, firing through the broken window at anything that moved. One man went down, then another. Her rifle clicked empty, and she drew the pistol Rowan had given her, kept firing. Beside her, Rowan was a force of nature. Every shot he took found its target.
Every movement was economical, practiced, deadly. He'd become the soldier he'd been during the war, and Mabel finally understood why that frightened him so much. He was good at this. Too good. But there were too many of them, and the cabin was collapsing around them. "Go!" Rowan shouted, grabbing her arm and hauling her toward the back. "Now!" They ran through fire and smoke, through the storage room, toward the small window that was their only exit. Rowan boosted Mabel up, and she squeezed through the narrow opening, landing hard in the snow outside. She turned to help Rowan through, but he was too big, the window too small. He got his head and shoulders through, then stuck fast. "No," Mabel breathed, grabbing his arms and pulling. "No, no, no. Leave me," he growled. "Run." Like hell. She braced her feet and pulled harder, using every ounce of strength she had. "Come on, you stubborn bastard." Behind Rowan, the cabin's roof beam cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Flames roared through the gap. Mabel pulled with strength she didn't know she possessed, fueled by pure terror and refusal to lose this man after everything they'd survived. Something gave, his shirt tearing, or his skin, she couldn't tell. And Rowan came through the window in a rush that sent them both tumbling into the snow. "Run!" he gasped, already pulling her to her feet. "Tree line. Now!" They ran. Behind them, men were shouting. Guns fired, bullets kicking up snow around their feet. The cabin groaned and started to collapse, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Mabel's lungs burned. Her legs screamed. But she kept running, Rowan's hand locked around hers, pulling her forward when she stumbled. They hit the tree line and kept going, crashing through underbrush, ducking under low branches. The sounds of pursuit followed, but the storm and the darkness and the forest were on their side now. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Rowan pulled them into a hollow beneath a massive fallen tree. They collapsed into the snow, both gasping for air, hearts hammering. "Are you hit?" Rowan demanded, running his hands over her, checking for injuries. "No, you? I'm fine." But there was blood on his face, his hands, soaking through his torn shirt. Some of it was his, some of it wasn't. They lay there in the snow, listening to the distant shouts of the men searching for them. The storm was getting worse, which would cover their tracks but also make survival harder. "The cabin's gone," Mabel said, the reality finally hitting her. "Everything we had." "We're alive, that's what matters." Rowan pulled her closer, sharing body heat. "We can rebuild. Can't rebuild if we're dead. Where do we go?" "There's an old trapper's shelter about 2 miles northeast. Abandoned, but it'll have walls and a roof. We can hold up there until—" He stopped, listening. The voices were getting closer. "They're tracking us," Mabel whispered. "Storm should have covered our tracks by now, unless—" Rowan's face went hard. "Unless they have dogs." As if summoning it with his words, they heard it. The distant baying of hunting hounds. "Can we outrun them?" "Not in this snow. Not for long." Rowan was already moving, pulling Mabel up. "But we can slow them down." They ran again, but this time Rowan led them through the worst terrain he could find. Down steep slopes, through frozen streams, anywhere that would make following harder. When they reached a narrow ravine, he stopped. "Down there. Fast as you can." "What about you?" "I'm going to leave a trail in the other direction. Buy us some time." He pushed her toward the ravine. "Get to the shelter. I'll find you." "No, we stay together." "Mabel, I'm not arguing about this again. We go together or we die together. Pick one." The hounds were getting closer. Rowan looked at the ravine, then at Mabel, then made a decision. "Together. But if I say run, you run. Deal?" "Deal." They descended into the ravine, half climbing, half falling down the icy slope. At the bottom, a frozen stream offered a path that would mask their scent. They followed it, moving as fast as the treacherous ice allowed. Behind them, the hounds reached the ravine's edge. Mabel heard them baying, confused, their handlers cursing as they tried to figure out which way their quarry had gone. "They'll split up," Rowan said, breathing hard. "Half down the ravine, half around the top. We've got maybe 10 minutes lead." "Then we better make them count." The next hour was a nightmare of ice and darkness, and the constant fear of hearing those hounds pick up their trail again. Every sound made Mabel jump. Every shadow could have been a man with a gun. When they finally saw the trapper's shelter through the trees, It looked like salvation despite being little more than a lean-to with 3 walls and a partially caved-in roof. "It's not much," Rowan said. "It's perfect." Mabel was already moving toward it, too cold and exhausted to care about aesthetics. Inside, they found evidence of previous occupants: old furs, a fire pit, some rusted traps. Rowan immediately started building a fire while Mabel checked the perimeter, making sure they were alone. "Small fire," Rowan said as flames caught. "Enough for warmth, not enough to be seen from a distance." They huddled close to it, both shaking from cold and adrenaline crash. Now that they'd stopped moving, Mabel could feel every bruise, every scratch, every place where fear had been keeping pain at bay. "Let me see your side," she said, noticing how Rowan was holding himself. "It's nothing." "Let me see it." He pulled up his torn shirt, revealing a deep gash across his ribs where something, bullet graze or debris, hard to tell, had torn through skin and muscle. "That needs stitches," Mabel said. "Later. First we need to make sure they can't find us." He stood with obvious effort. "I'm going to set some false trails, maybe a few traps if I can find materials. You stay here, keep the fire going, rest." "Rowan, please." He cupped her face in his bloody hands. "Please, just let me do this one thing. Let me keep you safe." Mabel wanted to argue, but she could see the need in his eyes, not just to protect her, but to do something, anything, to feel like he had control over this situation that had spiraled so far beyond it. "1 hour," she said. "If you're not back in 1 hour, I'm coming after you." "Deal." He kissed her hard and fast, then disappeared into the storm. Mabel sat by the fire, rifle across her lap, and waited. Every minute felt like 10. Every sound could have been Rowan returning or enemies closing in. She thought about the cabin burning, about the men they'd killed or wounded, about how quickly everything could fall apart. Just days ago, she'd been lying in bed with Rowan, feeling safe and warm, and maybe even happy for the first time in her life. Now they were hunted animals, bleeding and desperate, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the weapons in their hands. The hour mark came and went. Mabel stood, checked her rifle, and prepared to break her promise to stay put. Then Rowan emerged from the darkness, moving fast, his face grim. "They're close, maybe half a mile back." He grabbed what few supplies they'd found in the shelter. "We need to move, now." "Where?" "Deeper into the mountains, where even Dalton won't follow." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that might have been regret. "It's going to be bad, Mabel. Cold like you've never experienced. No shelter, minimal food. We might not make it." "But we might." "We might," he agreed. "Then let's go." They left the shelter and struck out into the worst terrain the mountains had to offer. The wind cut like knives. Snow fell so thick that Mabel could barely see Rowan walking 3 feet ahead of her. Her feet went numb within an hour, and her hands soon followed. But she kept walking. Because stopping meant dying, and she refused to give Dalton and his men the satisfaction. Sometime after midnight, or maybe it was closer to dawn, time had lost all meaning, they found a cave. Small, barely more than a crack in the rock face, but it was shelter and it was hidden. They crawled inside and collapsed. "We'll stay here until the storm passes," Rowan said through chattering teeth. "Then figure out our next move." Mabel was too cold to answer. She just pressed against him, sharing what little warmth they had left between them. In the darkness, Rowan's arms tightened around her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I brought this on you. Should have sent you away when I had the chance." "Shut up," Mabel managed. "Not your fault, and I wouldn't have gone anyway." "Stubborn woman." "Stubborn man." They lay there in the dark and the cold, 2 people who'd lost everything except each other. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. "Mabel?" Rowan's voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind howling outside their cave. "Yeah?" "When we get through this, and we will get through this, I want to do it properly." "Do what properly?" "Marry you. Not some arrangement where you showed up and I tolerated you. A real marriage. Choice and promises and meaning it." Mabel's throat went tight. "We're already married." "No. We're 2 people who survived together. That's different from choosing each other." His hand found hers in the darkness. "I'm choosing you, Mabel Hartwell, if you'll have me." "You're asking me this now? While we're freezing to death in a cave being hunted by killers?"
Seemed like as good a time as any. Despite everything, the cold, the fear, the exhaustion, Mabel laughed. You're insane. Is that a yes? That's a yes, you idiot. She kissed him, tasting blood and smoke and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Yes to all of it, the choosing and the promises and the meaning, it. Good. He pulled her closer. Because I'm not letting you go. Not to the cold, not to Dalton, not to anything. You're mine now. And you're mine. And I'm yours. They fell asleep like that, holding each other against the dark and the cold, two unwanted people who'd finally found exactly where they belonged. When Mabel woke, pale light was filtering into the cave and Rowan was already awake, watching the entrance with his rifle ready. Storms passed, he said quietly, and I haven't heard the hounds since before dawn. Either they gave up or the storm scattered them. What do we do now? Now we survive. He turned to look at her, and despite the blood and the bruises and the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, his eyes were clear. We stay up here until we're sure they're gone. Hunt, find shelter, rebuild. Then we go back down that mountain and reclaim what's ours. The cabin's destroyed. Then we build a new one, a better one, stronger. He reached out and traced her jaw with one rough thumb. I've been alone on that mountain for 10 years, Mabel. I'm not doing it alone anymore. No, she agreed, covering his hand with hers. You're not. They emerged from the cave into a world made new by snow and sunlight. The storm had buried their tracks, buried the blood, buried everything except the future they were going to build together. And somewhere down the mountain, Dalton and his men were learning that some prey fought back, that some people refused to be victims, that Rowan Granger and his stubborn, fierce, unbreakable wife were going to survive this winter and every winter after it, together. They lived like ghosts for 3 weeks. Moving through the high country where even experienced trappers rarely ventured, Rowan and Mabel survived on what they could hunt and what the mountain grudgingly provided. Rowan showed her how to find pine nuts cached by squirrels, how to identify which bark was edible when boiled, how to set snares with nothing but cord and bent saplings. The cold was relentless. Some mornings Mabel woke with ice crystals in her hair and couldn't feel her toes until they'd walked for an hour. Other nights they huddled in whatever shelter they could find, abandoned dens, natural rock overhangs, once even a snow cave Rowan dug with his bare hands, and fought to keep each other warm enough to survive until morning. This is worse than you described, Mabel said one particularly brutal night, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. I know. Rowan held her tighter against his chest. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, just don't let go. Never. But it wasn't all suffering. In the quiet moments between survival and sleep, they talked in ways they never had before, about childhoods and dreams and all the things that had broken them before they found each other. Rowan told her about the war, not the violence, but the men he'd served with, the ones who'd died and the ones who'd made it home, only to discover home didn't exist anymore. Mabel told him about her youngest brother, the only one who'd ever been kind to her, who drowned when she was 12 and left her alone in a family that blamed her for still being alive when he wasn't. They never said it outright, she whispered one night, but I could see it in their eyes. Why couldn't it have been her instead? Their loss, Rowan said fiercely. You're worth a dozen of them. You're biased. I'm right. On the 18th day, they saw smoke rising from the valley below, not from where the cabin had been, but from farther south, near the river crossing. That's Dalton's camp, Rowan said, studying the smoke through the trees, or what's left of it. What do you mean? Look at the smoke pattern. That's not a campfire. That's a funeral pyre. Mabel stared at the dark column rising into the gray sky. You think they're burning their dead? Or something went wrong. Disease, maybe. Or they turned on each other. He lowered himself back down beside her. Either way, it means they've got problems bigger than hunting us. So we wait. They watched the camp for 3 more days, taking turns keeping lookout from their hidden position in the rocks above. On the 4th day, they saw what they'd been hoping for, Dalton and his remaining men breaking camp, loading supplies onto horses, and heading east toward the mining territories. They're leaving, Mabel breathed. Looks like. Rowan counted the men. Only 3 of them left. We hit them harder than I thought.
Good. They waited until the group was completely out of sight, then waited another full day to be sure. Only then did Rowan allow them to descend toward the valley. The cabin site was exactly as devastating as Mabel had feared. Charred logs lay scattered like broken bones. The stone chimney still stood, blackened and cracked, a monument to everything they'd lost. Snow had already started reclaiming the clearing, covering the worst of the destruction in white that almost looked merciful. Mabel stood in what used to be their home and felt something crack inside her chest. "It's gone," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "Everything's gone." Rowan didn't answer immediately. He walked through the ruins slowly, his boots crunching over frozen ash, and knelt beside something half buried in debris. When he stood, he was holding a cast iron skillet, blackened and battered, but intact. "This is yours," he said, carrying it to her. "The one you brought from Ohio." Mabel took it with shaking hands. It was the only thing she'd stolen from her mother's kitchen, the only piece of home she'd allowed herself to keep. That it had survived when everything else burned felt like a sign, though of what, she couldn't say. "We'll rebuild," Rowan said, standing beside her. "Better than before." "With what?" "We've got nothing. No tools, no supplies, no—" "We've got this." He gestured at the stone chimney. "Good foundation, and we've got the knowledge of what worked and what didn't. Plus," he walked to the tree line and started digging in the snow. "What are you doing?" "Hidden cash. Buried it years ago in case of emergency." He pulled up a wooden box wrapped in oiled canvas. Inside were basic tools, fire-starting materials, and a small bag of coins. "Not much, but it's a start." Mabel stared at the cash, then at the ruins, then at Rowan. "You planned for this, for losing everything." "I've lost everything before. Learned to prepare for it." He closed the box. "But this time's different." "How?" "This time I've got a reason to rebuild." He met her eyes. "Last time I built a fortress to keep the world out. This time I'm building a home." They started that day. The work was brutal and slow and complicated by winter weather that seemed determined to kill them. They salvaged what they could from the ruins: nails, hinges, anything metal that had survived the fire. Rowan showed Mabel how to fell trees properly, how to strip bark, how to notch logs so they'd fit together tight enough to keep out the wind. Some days they made good progress. Others, a storm would blow in and undo hours of work in minutes. More than once, Mabel wanted to quit, to suggest they just head down to the valley and find somewhere easier to live. But every time she opened her mouth to say it, she'd see Rowan working with single-minded determination, and the words would die in her throat. He was building this for her, for them. Quitting would be admitting that Dalton had won, that fear was stronger than stubbornness, that they weren't worth the effort it took to survive. So she kept working. 6 weeks after the attack, they had 4 walls and part of a roof. It wasn't much, drafty and crude, and nothing like the solid fortress Rowan had built before. But it was theirs, constructed together from nothing but determination and refusal to surrender. "It's ugly," Mabel said, surveying their work. "It'll do." Rowan hammered in another nail. "We can make it pretty later. Right now, it just needs to keep us alive." That night, they slept inside their half-finished cabin for the first time, wrapped in furs they'd traded for in the valley, using the last of Rowan's hidden coins. The wind still got in through gaps in the roof, and the fire smoked badly because the chimney wasn't drawing right yet, but it felt like victory anyway. "We did it," Mabel said, lying against Rowan's chest. "We did." His arms tightened around her. "You know what this means?" "What?" "You officially survived a mountain winter, and an attack, and 3 weeks of living like a wild animal in the high country." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I'd say you've earned your place here." "I earned it the day I refused to leave." "You earned it the day you arrived and told me to carry your bags." Mabel laughed, the sound echoing off their rough-hewn walls. "I was so scared that day, terrified you'd take one look at me and send me back down the mountain before I even got inside. I almost did. You were too—" He stopped. "Too what? Too fat? Too plain? Too stubborn?" "Too real." His voice went quiet. The others, they were playing at being frontier wives, dressing up in a fantasy, But you looked at this place and saw it for what it was, saw me for what I was, and stayed anyway.
Because you were the first person who didn't pretend I was something I wasn't. Mabel turned to face him. You never told me to be smaller or quieter or more ladylike. You just let me be exactly who I was. A stubborn, fierce, unbreakable pain in my ass. Exactly. She kissed him. Your pain in the ass. Mine, he agreed. Spring came slowly to the mountain, arriving in reluctant increments. A day of warmth followed by 3 of cold snow melting only to return heavier than before. But gradually, inevitably, winter's grip weakened. The first wildflowers appeared in late March. By April, the stream was running free again, and Mabel could walk outside without her breath immediately turning to ice. The goats, which had somehow survived on their own during the attack and its aftermath, returned to the clearing looking scrawny but alive. They're tougher than they look, Rowan said, scratching the mean one's ears while she tried to bite him. Like someone else I know. If you're calling me a goat, this marriage is over before it started. Stubborn, bad-tempered, surprisingly resilient. He dodged her swat. If the shoe fits. By May, the cabin was finished. Not beautiful, but solid and weatherproof with a chimney that finally drew properly. They'd built it larger than the old one, with 2 rooms and windows positioned to catch morning light. Mabel had even managed to create a small garden plot, though what she'd planted was anybody's guess since she'd had to trade for seeds without knowing what half of them were. Could be carrots, she said, examining the first green shoots, or weeds. Either way, it's growing. That's something. Rowan straightened from where he'd been reinforcing the goat pen. Speaking of growing, we should talk. About? The future. What we want from it. He set down his hammer. I know this wasn't the life you imagined for yourself. Hard work and isolation, and a man who's better with axes than words. If you wanted to leave, go somewhere easier, somewhere with neighbors and shops and actual civilization, I'd understand. Mabel looked around at the clearing they'd reclaimed from fire and snow and violence, at the cabin they'd built together from nothing, at the mountain that had tried so hard to kill them and failed. You're an idiot, she said finally. What? You're an idiot if you think I survived all of this just to leave now that things are getting easier. She walked over and jabbed him in the chest. I didn't marry you for easy, Rowan Granger. I married you because you're the only person who ever looked at me and saw strength instead of flaws. You don't have flaws. I have nothing but flaws. I'm stubborn and argumentative and terrible at following orders. I talk too much, and I'm built like a draft horse, and I burned dinner 3 times last week. Twice. The 3rd time was my fault for distracting you. The point, Mabel continued, ignoring him, is that you looked at all those flaws and decided they were worth keeping anyway. So no, I'm not leaving. Not for easier, not for comfortable, not for anything. Rowan pulled her close, and for a moment they just stood there in the May sunshine, holding each other like they could make up for all the years they'd spent alone before finding this. I love you, he said quietly. Should have said it before now, but I was afraid. I know. Mabel pressed her face against his chest. I love you too. Even when you're being impossible. Especially when I'm being impossible. Especially then. Word of their survival spread slowly through the valley. The stagecoach driver, Pike, was the first to venture up the trail, his eyes widening when he saw them both alive and the new cabin standing where the old one had burned. Well, I'll be damned, he said, climbing down from his bench. The valley bet you were dead. Some said the mountain took you. Others said Dalton finished what he started. Dalton's gone, Rowan said flatly. And we're still here. Pike surveyed the new cabin, the cleared land, the signs of life reclaiming the clearing. You two did all this yourselves. Had plenty of time and motivation. Mabel handed him a cup of water from their well. What brings you up here, Pike? Wanted to see for myself, and he reached into his coat and pulled out a letter. This came for you, Mrs. Granger. From Ohio. Mabel's hand shook as she took the envelope. She recognized her mother's handwriting on the front, though it had been months since she'd thought about her family. You want me to... Rowan started. No. I need to do this. She opened it carefully and read the single page inside. Her expression went from apprehension to anger to something colder than either. What does it say? Pike asked. My father's dead. Heart gave out last winter.
Mabel folded the letter back up with precise, controlled movements. My mother wants me to come home. Says they need help with the farm, now that I'm the only one left who can do heavy labor. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. She doesn't even ask how I am, Mabel continued, her voice perfectly flat. Doesn't acknowledge the 7 months I've been gone. Just, we need you back. The farm needs you. Like I'm a piece of equipment they misplaced. Rowan's jaw was set hard enough to crack stone. You don't owe them anything. I know. Mabel walked to the fire and dropped the letter in. They all watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash. I'm exactly where I belong. Pike left an hour later with a promise to spread word that the Grangers were not only alive but thriving. As his stagecoach disappeared down the trail, Mabel felt a weight lift that she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying. You all right? Rowan asked, coming to stand beside her. Better than all right. She laced her fingers through his. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly who I want to be, exactly where I want to be, with the only person who's ever actually wanted me back. I more than want you, I need you. He turned her to face him. You know that, right? This place, this life, it only works because you're in it. Good, because you're stuck with me. Mabel smiled. For better or worse? Mostly worse, if we're being honest. Mostly worse, she agreed. But some better, too. Summer arrived in full force, turning the mountain from white to green almost overnight. Mabel's mystery garden produced something that might have been turnips, or might have been a particularly ambitious weed. They ate them anyway and survived. The goats finally started producing milk consistently, which meant fresh cheese and yogurt for the first time since the attack. Other survivors from the high country started trickling by, trappers who'd heard about the fight with Dalton's crew, hermits who'd spent years avoiding human contact but were curious about the woman who'd stayed when 7 others had fled. Most didn't linger, but a few stopped long enough to trade goods or share news from the wider world. That's how they learned that Dalton Reed had died in the mining camps, killed in a fight over gambling debts, according to one trapper. Frozen to death after getting drunk and passing out in a snowbank, according to another. The details varied, but the end result was the same. The man who'd nearly destroyed them was gone. Good riddance, Mabel said when she heard. You're not sorry he's dead? Should I be? He tried to kill us, burned down our home. Would have done worse if he'd caught us. She continued chopping vegetables for dinner. Some people make the world better by leaving it. Rowan watched her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. You've changed since you first arrived. So have you. I mean it. You're harder now, sharper edges. The mountain does that. Mabel set down her knife. Or maybe I was always hard and sharp and I just spent so many years trying to be soft and round because that's what everyone wanted. This place let me stop pretending. Do you miss it, being soft? Do you miss being alone? Not for a second. Then you have your answer. She went back to chopping. Besides, soft things don't survive up here. You taught me that. By August, they'd built a proper smokehouse and expanded the goat pen to hold 2 more animals Rowan had traded for. The cabin had actual furniture now, rough but functional, built during long evenings when they had light to work by. Mabel had even managed to create curtains from fabric she'd painstakingly woven from plant fibers and goat hair, though they were scratchy and uneven and nothing like the delicate cotton ones she'd grown up with. They're perfect, Rowan said when she hung them. They're terrible. They're yours. That makes them perfect. One evening in late summer, they sat on the porch they'd built, another addition the old cabin had lacked, and watched the sun set behind the peaks. The air was warm for once, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers instead of ice and death. I've been thinking, Rowan said. Dangerous habit. About the future. About what comes next. He took her hand. We've survived the worst this mountain can throw at us. Built a home from nothing. Proved we can make it through anything as long as we're together. Where are you going with this? He stopped, searching for words. I want to build something bigger than just survival. Want to prove that 2 unwanted, broken people can create something worth having. Mabel's breath caught. You're talking about children. Only if you want them. I know you've got every reason not to. Your own family treated you like a burden, and bringing a child into this harsh place. Yes. Rowan stopped mid-sentence. Yes.
Yes, I want them. Want to raise a child who never feels unwanted, who grows up knowing they're loved and valued exactly as they are. Mabel squeezed his hand. Want to build a family that's nothing like the ones we came from. Something fierce and tender crossed Rowan's face. He pulled her into his lap and held her like she might disappear if he let go. "You're sure?" he asked against her hair. "I'm sure. About this. About you. About everything we're building here." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "We're going to mess it up sometimes. Be too harsh or too protective or repeat mistakes we swore we'd never make. But we'll do it together, and we'll keep trying until we get it right." "Together," he agreed. That night they made love slowly, carefully, like they were creating something sacred instead of just giving in to desire. And maybe they were. Maybe that's what love looked like when it grew between broken people, not perfect or pretty, but real and chosen and built deliberately from nothing. September brought early snow and the knowledge that another winter was coming. But this time they were ready. Food stores overflowed. Firewood stood stacked higher than the cabin roof. The new structure was solid and weatherproof, built to withstand anything nature threw at it. More importantly, they were ready, not just with supplies, but with each other. They'd learned to read each other's moods, to know when to push and when to give space, to fight without breaking and love without smothering. "Think we'll make it through?" Mabel asked one night as the first serious storm of the season rolled in. "I know we will." Rowan added another log to the fire. "We've survived worse." "That's what you always say." "Because it's always true." He pulled her close. "And because every winter we survive together makes us stronger for the next one." The storm lasted 4 days, but they barely noticed. They had food and warmth and each other, which was more than either of them had ever expected to find. On the 5th day, the storm broke, and Mabel woke to sunlight streaming through their scratchy curtains, and Rowan already awake beside her. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She stretched, feeling content in a way that still surprised her sometimes. "What are you thinking about?" "How 7 brides ran from this mountain, and the 8th one stayed and claimed it as her own." "Claimed you as my own?" "Same thing." He traced patterns on her shoulder. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "I spent 10 years trying to scare people away because I thought being alone was safer than being left. Built walls so high nobody could climb them. And then you showed up and didn't bother climbing, just kicked the door down and refused to leave." "You make me sound very aggressive." "You are very aggressive. It's one of your better qualities." He kissed her forehead. "Point is, I was wrong. Being alone isn't safer. It's just slower death. You saved me from that." "We saved each other," Mabel corrected. "I was dying slowly too, just in a different way." They lay there in comfortable silence, listening to the mountain wake up around them. Somewhere outside, the goats were demanding breakfast. The chickens they'd recently acquired were making irritated noises about the cold. Life continued, demanding and difficult, and theirs. "Rowan?" Mabel said eventually. "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For being terrible at scaring me away. For being stubborn enough to match my stubborn. For building a home instead of a fortress." She pressed closer. "For choosing me back." His arms tightened around her. "Every day. For the rest of our lives." Winter settled in hard after that, but they weathered it together. Some days were brutal. Temperatures so low that water froze solid in its bucket within minutes of bringing it inside. Other days were almost pleasant, the kind of cold that felt clean instead of killing. They fell into rhythms that felt like the opposite of loneliness. Mabel would wake first and restart the fire. Rowan would handle the livestock while she made breakfast. They'd work together through the day, maintaining their home, preparing for the next storm, surviving in all the small ways that added up to living. And at night, they'd lie together in the bed they'd built and talk about everything and nothing until sleep claimed them. One particularly cold night in January, almost exactly a year after Mabel had first arrived, she felt Rowan's hand settle on her stomach. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking." His voice held a note she couldn't quite identify. "About the future." "We've survived the present, that's future enough for now." "I mean, our future. The one we're building deliberately, not just surviving into." His thumb traced circles on her skin through her nightshirt. "The family we talked about." Mabel covered his hand with hers. "We'll get there. We've got time." "We do," he agreed. "All the time in the world."
Spring came again, as it always did, and with it came proof that survival could become more than just not dying. Mabel's garden exploded with actual, recognizable vegetables this time, carrots and potatoes, and something that might have been lettuce. The goats produced kids, doubling their herd. Word spread through the valley that the Grangers were not just alive, but thriving, and more travelers began stopping by to trade or simply to see for themselves. Pike visited regularly now, bringing mail and supplies and news from the wider world. Through him, they learned that 7 brides had become a legend in the valley, a cautionary tale about the mountain that ate soft things. "They're calling Mabel the 8th bride," Pike said one afternoon, accepting coffee and fresh bread. "The one who tamed the mountain." "I didn't tame anything," Mabel said. "I just refused to run from it." Same thing, in their eyes. Pike bit into the bread with obvious appreciation. "There's talk of other women wanting to follow your example, fed up with valley life, looking for something harder but more honest." Rowan and Mabel exchanged glances. "They should know it's not romantic," Mabel said carefully. "It's brutal and lonely, and there were times I wasn't sure we'd make it through the night. But you did make it through." Pike gestured at the cabin, the garden, the visible signs of life they'd built. "That means something to people who feel like they're dying slowly in comfort." After Pike left, Mabel stood in the clearing and looked at everything they'd created. A year ago, she'd been unwanted baggage her family paid someone to take. Now she was part of a legend, proof that refusing to give up could transform you into something stronger than you'd ever imagined. "You all right?" Rowan asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just thinking about how much has changed, how much we've changed." "Regret any of it?" "Not a second." She leaned against him. "You?" "Only that I wasted 7 brides being too stubborn to see what I needed." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Should have sent for you first. You wouldn't have been ready for me first. We both needed to be broken enough to fit together right." "Romantic. Honest." She turns to face him. "We're not a fairy tale, Rowan. We're 2 damaged people who built something real from nothing. That's better than any fairy tale." "It is," he agreed. As summer deepened into fall and fall began its slow slide toward winter again, they prepared for the cycle to repeat. But this time felt different. This time they weren't just surviving, they were living deliberately, building something meant to last beyond just the next storm. And when the first snow fell in October, Mabel stood on their porch with Rowan's arm around her waist and felt something she'd never expected to feel in her life. Peace. Not the absence of struggle. The mountain would always be hard, winter would always be brutal, survival would always require everything they had. But peace in knowing that she was exactly where she belonged, with the only person who'd ever truly wanted her there. "Ready for another winter?" Rowan asked. "With you?" "Always." They went inside together, shutting the door against the cold, and settled in to weather whatever came next. Together. The way they'd face every challenge for the rest of their lives. 2 unwanted people who'd proven that sometimes the rejected become the irreplaceable, that love grows strongest in the harshest soil, and that home isn't a place you find but something you build with your own scarred hands and stubborn heart. The mountain had tested them and found them worthy, and they had tested each other and chosen to stay. That was the real victory, not surviving the cold or the violence or the isolation, but choosing each other every single day despite knowing exactly how hard it would be. 7 brides had run from this mountain, but the 8th had stayed and made it hers. And in doing so, had transformed from the woman nobody wanted into the woman who needed nothing but her own strength and the love of a man who'd finally learned that being chosen was worth more than being alone. The valley would tell their story for generations. The mountain man and his unbreakable wife, the fortress that became a home, the 2 broken people who built something stronger than either of them had been alone. But Rowan and Mabel didn't care about legends or stories. They cared about splitting wood before the next storm, about making sure the goats had enough hay, about sitting by the fire at night and talking about nothing and everything until sleep claimed them. They cared about the life they'd built deliberately, moment by moment, choice by choice, from the ashes of everything they'd lost and everything they'd never had. And when spring came again and brought with it the first signs that their family would soon grow beyond just the 2 of them, they faced that new terror and wonder the same way they'd faced everything else, together, stubborn and scarred and absolutely certain that whatever came next, they could handle it. because they were no longer the unwanted daughter and the cursed mountain man. They were Rowan and Mabel Granger, and they'd survived everything the world could throw at them by refusing to give up on each other. That was worth more than beauty or perfection or any other thing society claimed mattered. It was real, it was theirs, and it was enough.